But I've spent most of my life working towards Olympic aspirations as a competitive figure skater. Let go of those Olympic aspirations, which was definitely the most difficult career decision I've ever made. I was really focused on pursuing a career that was going to have some sort of impact that was bigger than myself. That there were these startups, these wild companies out there that really thought about disrupting entire markets. What you're really investing in are the leadership behind the idea. Candidly, the most consistent way I've seen people break into venture is cold email.
What makes you choose that A company to invest in rather than B? What will make you invest?
There's distinct user needs, there's product opportunities, and there's market opportunities. We literally metabolize drugs differently.
Hello everyone, welcome back to Nadia's Lab. Today we are in New York City and I'm joined by wonderful Mira Kaufman. Mira is a key member of Ingeborg Investment team, the family office of Olivia Walton, and she plays a leading role in sourcing, diligencing, and supporting their portfolio for female startups and venture funds. At Ingeborg, you invest on behalf of single family office. How does your approach to fund management differ from more for traditional kind of funding institutions?
Yeah, I love this question because I actually think that there's such a misconception about how big the delta is between family office world and institutional venture world, where in reality, financial strategies for investment vary a ton fund to fund, whether it's within the institutional world or in family office.
Yeah.
And at the core, the real difference between family office and institutional venture is the source of capital. So at Ingeborg, we are the single family office of Olivia Walton.
Okay.
So we don't have limited partners. We solely invest capital on behalf of Olivia.
Okay.
Versus institutional funds are raising from tons of different sources of capital across family offices, other types of limited partners, endowments, etc. And so they have a very different governance structure where they have to report back to those partners on the strategy they propose. In reality, though, what we do is quite similar. We each have our own investment theses. We set out a strategy and then we execute on it and we report on how that strategy is going to, for us, the family versus the LPs.
Oh, wow. That's kind of like you're talking like a foreign language for me because I don't know anything about this. So I'm glad I can meet someone who can explain it to me and my listeners in simple terms. So again, I'm so grateful to have you here. Thank you for joining my little podcast. Can you tell me a little bit more about yourself, your background, and a little bit of like how did your career unfold?
Yeah, I've had a really non-traditional background for breaking into venture.
I love to hear
and that. On a cumulative basis, I've actually spent more of my time not pursuing this career path than pursuing it, which is crazy to think about. But I've spent most of my life working towards Olympic aspirations as a competitive figure skater.
Wow.
And it actually wasn't until I enrolled in my undergraduate degree at the University of Michigan's Business School, where I was a full-time student for the first time since when I was 11. Wow. And so when I decided to sort of let go of those Olympic aspirations, which was definitely the most difficult career decision I've ever made, I was really focused on pursuing a career that was going to have some sort of impact that was bigger than myself. Wow. That seemed like the only way to make kind of letting go of those Olympic aspirations worth it. And so I had no idea what I wanted to do professionally. I had no exposure to anything business related, let alone venture or investing. And I actually started out in politics. I managed a state Senate campaign when I was 18 years old.
Impressive. 18 years old.
I loved the fast-paced environment. I loved that the more you leaned in, the more responsibility you were given. I started out on the campaign as a volunteer like anyone else and ended up becoming the campaign manager. But at the same time, I was, a new business student, newly learning about everything that area of coursework entailed and all of the potential opportunities for careers through that. And it was in that setting that I learned about startups and the idea of disruption, the idea that instead of working towards kind of pragmatic, incremental progress towards solving a big problem, that there were these startups, these wild companies out there that really thought about disrupting entire markets and how to rethink how you could solve problems that maybe had never been attempted to be solved before. And there was something that felt so familiar about that ecosystem relative to my experience as an athlete, you know, being surrounded by super driven, hardworking, almost obsessive people that were working towards their goals. And it was through learning about startups that I started to ask the question, you know, who decides? Who decides what a good idea is for a business? I had never heard of the venture industry. I'd never heard about investing. But I started going to pitch competitions to learn more about startups. And as I pulled back the layers of like, who judges these? Like truly who decides?
Yeah.
I organically discovered this entire industry and I didn't know anyone that worked in it. I'd never met anyone that was part of the industry, but I just started learning.
Do you ever look back and think, wow, I wish I became the best ice skater? Was it Olympic ice skater?
Yeah, that was the goal. You know, this is maybe a personal life hot take, but I don't believe in regret. I think that the more intentional you are about the decision that you make in the moment, and as long as you know and feel grounded that if you go back in time with the information that you had in that moment, you would make the same decision every single time, then it was the right decision. And the way that it can become, I think, easier to have regret is when you're not really fully making decisions from as informed of a place as possible. And so I think I feel really grounded in why I decided to let the aspirations go. I coached for many years after I stopped competing, and you know, the experience continues to shape me today, and especially, you know, in women's health, which I know we're going to get into a little bit more. I don't think that I would have been able to really identify with so many of the problem statements that I now try and solve from the other side of the spectrum if I hadn't gone through so many of those challenges as an athlete.
I can imagine. Yeah. It does shape you as a person.
Totally.
And I was going to ask, how did you break into the world of venture capital, which you kind of touch base on, but you can elaborate more. And also, what kind of experience and skills do you think that people who enter that space require?
Yeah, it's funny because, and I love the way you asked that question from like a skills perspective, because when I think about how I broke into it, now looking back, I was almost doing the job of an investor when I tried to break into the space. I, like I said, didn't know anyone. And when you're investing, you often start out not with a ton of baseline information about a market opportunity, and you have to just sort of be curious and go explore and go learn. And that's what I did when I broke into venture. It started with very basic Google searches, you know, like what is a Series A company and what is pre-money and post-money? Like I started from a baseline of nothing. And I just tried to find every single person that I could potentially get introduced to or reach out to cold that was part of the industry, and slowly learn about it that way. And so I spent probably 8 months just cold outreaching people, trying to ask them questions. I would send very personalized emails to investors about news articles that I had found that were related to their portfolio companies or trends that I was seeing with very specific questions. And really, those are the types of skills that you apply as an investor also, because you're trying to get in touch with founders. You know, I met Dina because I reached out to her cold over email because I was interested in the fertility space. And so I really think that it was through this like organic curiosity and interest that I was able to break into the industry. And I think that's a really important skill as well. And then obviously you can also think about the skills needed for a career path in venture in terms of the life cycle of a deal. So you have to find the companies, you know, you have to work on sourcing, you have to do the diligence, the research to decide if it's a good investment or not, which is quite analytical. It's a lot of data cutting and market analysis and finding the right people to get the right inputs from. And then once you make an investment, you want to do everything in your power to help ensure that those companies succeed. And so that's where you might be helping with introductions for potential hires or other investors or business development opportunities, so that you can really ensure that you play a role in hopefully, enabling your portfolio to grow.
Oh, wow, that's impressive. Yeah, this is so impressive. Thank you so much for sharing it with us. And you have been deeply involved with, and you mentioned women's health investing. And I find this very brilliant. And I do a lot of, episodes about women's health and obviously women supporting women in every possible situation and case. So how was that experience been for you? And how do you think that, people are, more investments are going towards women's health, and not just women's health, but other, maybe tech companies which are run by women, or which are creating something, making women's life easier and better?
Yeah. I mean, our entire thesis at Ingeborg is about investing in innovation that's built with women in mind. And it's crazy because that's such a common sense idea, right?
Exactly.
Like, where someone has a distinct experience, they have a distinct user need. And where there's distinct user needs, there's product opportunities and there's market opportunities, because products and innovation exists to meet user needs, whether it's direct to consumer or B2B.
Yeah.
And women's health is no different, right? Like, we have different physiology in our bodies. We process, you're in the pharmacy space, we literally metabolize drugs differently than men. It's everything. And I think one of the things that's been so amazing about really starting my career in women's health from the jump when I became an investor was that it's such a massive market opportunity. And one of, I think, the most straightforward in hindsight ways to be successful as an investor is to pick a market that's growing really fast and tie yourself to it. Okay. And I think in a lot of ways I've bet my career on women's health growing, and it's been amazing to see from when I first started having conversations about women's health how little knowledge and how little interest there really was in the category. Fast forward to today, I think we still have a long way to go in terms of having the proportionate amount of investment go into the category and to expand even how we define women's health. And from a consumer standpoint, I've never seen women's health issues be part of the mainstream conversation more. And I think that's going to drive so much demand, because where there's public outcry, there's such a faster pace of awareness for everyone in the ecosystem, on the provider side, on the health system side, on the pharma side, and on the investor side.
This is kind of going off side, but like you mentioned, when you're looking into what to invest in, you do a lot of research, background checks. And then after you invest, you trying to help that company kind of expand. And how do you, well, I don't know if you can explain this in simple terms, probably not, but like, how do you, between A and B companies, what makes you choose that A company to invest in rather than B? What would make you invest? Is it that you just see more potential in one than another, or?
There's so many factors that play into it. And I think chief among all of them is who's doing the building. Because at the end of the day, especially with early stage investing, the exact business model, the exact go-to-market or growth strategy, the exact product even can change quite a lot. But what you're really investing in are the leadership behind the idea. And so we spend a lot of time, often more than a year, getting to know founders before we make a first investment. And that's really critical. Of course, all of the other things are super important too. And the more time we spend in a category and in a market, the more we have a prepared mind about what types of strategies we think are most primed to succeed. And then it's this really fun, relationship development process where when we meet someone that's really thinking about something, in a way that is aligned to the gap that we've seen in the market, we already know, what we're going to be excited about. And then when you compound that with the unique insights, that a founder has who's spent so much more time cumulatively focused on just one problem versus us who kind of weave in and out of all different types of market opportunities, we can get smart really fast and get excited.
Wow, that's brilliant. Thank you for sharing that. I actually never invested in anything myself, but this is yeah, I need to start. Yeah. And we talked about women's health being underfunded. And as you mentioned, you're seeing this shift, you're seeing this increase. And do you see other clients showing interest in investing in the space in women's health?
Yeah, I think the fact that, women's health has even become a mainstream topic of conversation in investment circles in and of itself is such an important indicator of the growing interest and awareness. Because, even 5 years ago, the term Femtech, for example, came into existence because the founders of Clue couldn't talk about menstruation in front of investors. Like, they just were not comfortable talking about something that almost every single woman experiences on a monthly basis. And so I think we've come so far in terms of actually talking about the problems in the correct physiological terms, recognizing that women's health is not just, our reproductive health, but our entire health.
Exactly.
And that realistically, if you're investing in any kind of healthcare, you're investing in women's health. It's just whether or not you're conscious and cognizant of if the solutions are actually being built to work as well for women as they are for men. And so I think that there is growing investment interest. I think that there's so much more work to be done to continue to educate the investment community, and for the investment community that's already investing in women's health to educate each other so that less of the burden also is on founders.
Yeah, I agree with that. And is there any specific innovations in women's health, maybe health tech, that you are very excited about right now?
Yeah, so many in the portfolio. I'm going to try not to just name drop, so I'll talk about it in themes.
General,
but, across some female-specific conditions, we're seeing so much greater access to better midlife and longevity care, where, again, I think there's this really obvious financial and economic opportunity to serve women, in a business model that really makes sense, because there is not, unfortunately, a tremendous amount of medical school training for menopause, and every single woman will go through menopause, and it is a very long condition that requires long-term care and long-term management, which in venture and business terms translates to long lifetime value and a high lifetime value customer. And so we're so excited to, about our investments in the menopause space, in fertility and in, menstruation and menstrual diagnostics. We have a number of investments as well, similarly in the maternity space with care delivery for actual maternity care, where we very much take the approach that, babies are delivered in person, and we really need better in-person care if we want to improve outcomes. And so we're seeing so much progress across so many different fronts. And from a broad healthcare innovation standpoint, we're also really excited about tailwinds created from regulatory changes that are enabling greater access to care, hopefully for women's health startups. So we've been spending a lot of time in the ICHRA space, which is individual coverage health reimbursement arrangements. Happy to talk about that more another time, but there's so much.
Okay, that's great. And I like to ask this. So I think we touched base on, women's health, your investment, your career. Is there anything in your career that you maybe regret or you wish you did differently, or, you'd go back to your younger self and say, Mira, don't do this, do that? Or do you think that every step and kind of choice you made brought you where you are right now?
I will probably always be a perfectionist in some capacity. And so I think it's impossible for me to look back and think everything was perfect. There's always room for improvement in absolutely everything that I do. And so I could give you so many examples of things where I'm like, I know I could have done this better. I know I could have done that better. And at the same time, I don't think it's mutually exclusive. I do genuinely believe that every decision brought me to where I am today. And I feel really strongly that, especially in a career like venture where there's not cyclical recruiting cycles. Like, we talk about how difficult it is to break into venture as an industry. And part of the reason is simply because there just aren't as many roles. And so I think a lot about how to kind of create the right circumstances to optimize for serendipity, to optimize for setting yourself up to be in the right place at the right time. And so I'm so grateful that I decided very early on that my signal was going to be about women's health, and I talked everyone's ear off about it that I could find.
Best thing you could have done, yeah.
And I don't think I would have gotten the role that I have now without doing that. So I think if anything, I probably could have been even louder. But I do genuinely believe that it's probably where I am today.
And what advice would you give to someone who's trying to, want to follow your footsteps? And, anyone curious also about getting into venture capital or the investment world, like yourself?
Candidly, the most consistent way I've seen people break into venture is cold email. People always say, it's about who you know. Mm-hmm. And I don't disagree with that. Building a network is really important. Yeah. But I think what that, it's about who you know kind of leaves out is the whole process of getting to know people and of expanding your network. And one of the great things about the startup and venture ecosystems is that cold outreach and, just putting yourself out there is incredibly normalized. People expect it. And so I would say be super specific in what your ask is. Try to lead with creating value. I still think back to those initial emails that I sent to get my first role in venture, and coming up with potential trends or trying to offer introductions to companies that I thought could be interesting. Like, creativity is such an underrated skill set when it comes to cold outreach. And I think that that's one of the best ways to build your network.
Yeah, I agree. But there is no place to being shy or what if. And I remember I've been to so many when I was like a younger couple. I think I finally overcome this kind of thing. This is something that was blocking me in my brain to like approach people. Yeah. And even if you are, so let's say it's difficult to meet people, but I've been to several events with people who I was like really interested in talking to and meeting them and just exchanging my number or something, email. And I just wouldn't, because I was like, I don't want to bother them or I'm too shy.
Totally.
And I'm like, well, what can the worst thing that can happen? They will
I
say
think
no.
It's such a mental unlock. And like to your earlier question on things that you can always do differently. Yeah. Like I think the narrative that we tell ourselves becomes our truth in so many ways. Absolutely. And so if we're telling ourselves, but they don't want to hear from you, or don't go do that, that's stupid, don't go reach out to that person, that CEO is never going to talk to me, then that becomes what's true. But the second you just say, give yourself permission to go for it, almost as if someone's telling you, like, go get 5 people's LinkedIns right now. Go, just give yourself permission to take the action, and it's going to totally transform things.
Absolutely. I agree 100%. Thank you for that advice. Yeah. And the last question, as a pharmacist, I like to ask this all my guests. Is there any, obviously you live in, in such a busy city, you have so many meetings. I mean, I know how difficult it was to, meet you. How do you stay stress-free? And, is there any like supplement or wellness hack, something that you swear by and like, this helps me, after a difficult day at work, or something that you really, religiously do or consume?
Yeah. I think it probably goes back to my early days as a figure skater, but movement is so important to me. I started taking choreographed dance classes once a week, and it really just brings me so much joy. And to plug a portfolio company, I just started taking Evie's probiotic, and I'm loving it. So
I met
everyone go take it. Probiotic for women by women.
I was so lucky that she gave me one of her tests, and I'm gonna do a test as well. And I think that that's a little thing that you can do, is like vaginal probiotics from Evie. It's really good, and it's something that, again, what her company does is so interesting, because
so amazing.
It's really, no one ever looks into vaginal microbiome, right? So it's so innovative, it's so great, and it gives us like information about our bodies that we need, and it also provides explanation for why certain, why we have certain conditions maybe. And so that's great. But Mira, this brings us to an end. Thank you so much for this insightful and useful conversation. I feel like, to someone who's knows nothing about venture funds and investment, you've really like given me the good explanation of what it is. And for people who maybe want to follow your footsteps, I think that this episode is quite useful, as they can really understand how to get in, and just some advice of like not being shy and just, putting yourself out there, getting in touch with people and all that.
Oh, well, thank you so much.
Thank you so much for joining me. It was a pleasure. I hope to see you next time.
Yeah.
And for our listeners, I hope you enjoyed this as much as I did. Don't forget to subscribe and join me next week as well. Bye.